Hello my friends and welcome. In this video I want to tell you the biggest mistake that Putin has done in this war. It happened the last year, in 2025, and for him personally it's even worse than the start of this war. Well, let me tell you what I mean. Back in February 2022, Putin had started the war in an attempt to gain control over the entire Ukraine, or most of the part in Ukraine. That's why his forces went to Kyiv. There was this huge convoy of the Russian forces from the north, from Belarus territory. Russia also landed their paratroopers in Gostomel, and the idea was to dismiss the Ukrainian government from the power, put their own puppet one, maybe with ex-president Yanukovych, who was really a pro-Russian one and who lives in Russia, Rostov Oblast, and that is how Ukraine could be converted into the second Belarus pretty much fast. But we all know what happened next. If Russia was more or less successful in the south, in the northern areas and also in Kyiv, they were not successful at all. And after a while, Putin understood that he doesn't have enough forces right away to conquer Ukraine. So to minimize the risks of his forces being trapped, encircled or demolished, and it was happening like that because those convoys, they were exposed to Ukrainian aviation and artillery strikes, plus Russia wasn't able to provide the air superiority for its forces, so the only way was to withdraw from the Kyiv Oblast, Kharkiv, and to change this war to the war of attrition. But even with this war, Putin is failing little by little. I mean, yes, Russia may look like it's stronger than Ukraine, and the fact it's like that. Russia has more population, they have more army, they have more resources and military production, plus they have their friends like North Korea that supplies ammunition. But Ukraine is also not alone in this war. There's the backup from European allies. Still there's the PURO program, even with Donald Trump's administration, that sells weapons for Europeans. It's pretty much profitable for Donald Trump because he was sponsored by those guys who work in the military industrial complex. So I do not expect that the United States of America will completely cease even the selling of the weapons for Ukraine. I think it's unrealistic, even though before United States they froze the military support multiple of the times for Ukraine, but it was just political leverage to somehow act on Ukraine. But that leverage cannot be used, I guess, any longer because Ukraine is not that dependent on the United States as before. Mostly Ukrainian air defense is dependent. And the good thing that Ukraine finally obtained the support from the European Union, 90 billion euros. It should be enough for at least 1 year of the war. Well, they say 2 years, but I think for 2 years it's not enough. Maybe they're gonna revise the support. So I expect that in entire 2026 and the first half of 2027, Ukraine will have enough resources for its defense. And by staying in defense, Ukraine actually has way less losses compared to the Russian army, so Ukraine actually needs less of the resources. Russian army loses 8 times more in those hot spots, like for example Pokrov's direction or Gulai Pole, where Ukraine went on a counterattack in attempt to slow down at least the Russian army. But the marker of success recently was Kupiansk operation. It definitely shows that it's not going according to the Russian plan at all, and Russia cannot fulfill its ambitious goal in Ukraine on front lines. Russian generals, they maybe mislead political regime of Russia, Putin. Maybe the general commander Gerasimov tells the wrong information, but I think that the entire Russian army system is rotted down. I think that generals in Russia, they demand unrealistic goals from the local commanders, and local commanders, for them it's easier to send a couple of the guys or even one soldier with the Russian flag, then later on film the guy from the drone and send it to the higher Russian command telling, okay, we took this position, you see, we have this report. But later on Ukraine flatlines this infiltration attack and finishes the rest of the Russian attack attempts. But Gerasimov and other responsible generals, they present this fake information for Putin, and Putin proclaims that we took Kupiansk. Kupiansk is fully under our control based on those flags all around the city. But later on, it appeared to be just a hoax. And it seems like the Russian generals and Putin himself, they still live in this old philosophy of the war. They do not understand the real point of the drones, of creating the kill zone. I'm reading lots of the complaints from the Russian military bloggers who are not affiliated with the Russian Defense Ministry, and they're screaming that it's impossible to advance without heavy losses any longer, and that they require millions of the soldiers if they really want to fulfill the dream of Putin to occupy Donbass, Zaporizhia Oblast, Kherson region fully. They say it's just a madness to send infantry or convoy attacks, but Russian generals, they continue to do it. Still they're sending those convoys, still they're using motorcycles, all-terrain vehicles, even horses, recently, in addition to the donkeys for supplies. It definitely tells that there is a huge problem in the Russian army. Even though in 2025 Russia gained a little bit more territory compared to 2024, but for what cost? They lost a lot, and no big settlements were captured by Russia, as they say, liberated, that they annihilated everything down to the ground, flat line, and they say, oh, we liberated the settlement, some of the village. And the scale of the war had changed, then those generals, they report to Putin, oh, we occupied this small village, or that small town, or they mislead, actually providing fake information that they've occupied even Pokrovsk by the time Ukraine celebrates New Year in Pokrovsk, firing fireworks. So it's just not the scale of the second army in the world. And some Russian propagandists say, oh, who says that Russian army is the second one in the world, the second biggest one? Well, the Russian propaganda said it in 2022, that for them it will take just a few days to occupy entire Ukraine, that they have the second army in the world, lots of the nukes and so on. But Russia wasted its entire army. All of the reserves from the Soviet Union era, reserves that were accumulated for the fight against the entire NATO bloc, are now being almost wasted in Ukrainian war. The war against not a big neighboring state, but with population that determined to defend that state, Ukraine. So we are coming now to the big mistake, the biggest one that Putin have done in this war. He didn't agree on proposal from Donald Trump, and it will ruin Russia. It will ruin its economy, it will ruin its army, everything. Putin had the last chance to agree for the proposal on ceasefire in Ukraine, to hold the current front lines, because Ukraine agreed on that. Zelensky said personally, well, initially he was against, because Ukrainians, they do not believe in a standstill for a long time, that the ceasefire is going to be just temporary. And I guess, yes, it's going to be like that, but still, Putin had the variant to exit this war, still holding lots of the Ukrainian territory. The great part of Donetsk Oblast, almost full Luhansk Oblast, vast part of Zaporizhia and Kherson region. Yes, up to the Dnieper River without Kherson itself. So it was definitely initially in the spring 2025 the idea for Donald Trump to say, you stop the war and that's it, freeze it at the current front line. But no, Putin wanted more. And later on, Putin managed to convince Witkoff, Kushner, whoever was the representative from Donald Trump in this, some sort of the business deal, that he needs Donetsk Oblast, Donetsk, Luhansk, but he is willing to stop maybe in Zaporizhia, in Kherson. But all of that is a brainwash of the Donald Trump's administration. And it seems like Donald Trump starts to understand that. For Putin, the reality that he doesn't want to stop, even by occupying Donetsk, the main ambition for him is to go further. As he stated in his recent interviews, he is not even talking about Donbass, he is speaking about original Russian territories. And what can you include in original Russian territories? Could Kyiv be an original Russian territory? Because, baptizing of Rus happened initially in Kyiv. And Russian propaganda is openly calling it a Russian city. It is our city. Kyiv is the mother of the Russian cities. They even say like that. The sad thing here is that the White House administration is still blinded by Putin, maybe because Donald Trump, he likes those dictators, and he openly says that Putin would like to stop the war. Yeah, obviously, Putin would like to stop the war if he occupies the entire Ukraine. Donbass is not the objective for Putin. Crimea was not the objective for Putin. No, he wants to establish the full control over the ex-Soviet countries, not just Ukraine, not just Belarus, but here we speak about Baltic countries, Central Asian countries. Plus, Putin wants to expand his influence towards the Eastern Europe and Caucasus. Yes, but the fact is that Putin is in lack of resources. Yes, he has those more compared to Ukraine, but to reach his ambitious goals, his economy is not okay. As I told you, his army has been almost wasted. All of those stockpiles of the tanks, BTRs, BMPs, artillery and everything, still they produce something, but it's not enough for the ambitious plan of Putin. And because there is the rotted down system of the Russian military, Putin is not understanding what is happening on the ground, the realities on the ground. And I believe that Putin has a maximum 2 years, so 2026, 2027, but in the beginning of 2028, there's going to be a devastated circumstances for Russia. I think that Russia cannot handle it, this full-scale war for more than 2 years, and 2026 will be finally a decisive one for Russia of whether they're gonna announce a full mobilization of their army men, and that's the last hope of Putin. Maybe to send so many mid-waves to break through Ukrainian defense lines, to go in those open field regions and to get control over Zaporizhia, over even Kharkiv, maybe entire Donbass and so on. But it will create so much disturbances within Russia. For now, we see that Russians are pretty much okay with their losses. It's because the Russian society understands that the losses are coming from those volunteers who sign contracts for millions of rubles. So no one is generally forcing Russians to join the Russian army. It is happening, but just occasionally. Not massively, but if there is a huge mobilization, once again, just imagine how many people would like to exit Russia once again, as it was in 2022. That mobilization definitely triggered lots of the workforce to exit Russia. It harmed Russian economy a lot. By mobilizing 300,000 Russian soldiers, Russia lost roughly 700 Russians who were working in different of the spheres. And if they mobilize 1 million next time, just imagine what it could be. It's gonna be a very huge disaster. It's a very risky step for Putin from any sort of the perspective, from his popularity among Russians till the actual hit on the Russian economy. It could be devastating, especially even right now that Russia is in lack of the workforce in multiple of the spheres. Yes, in some of the companies they had to lay off people, but in multiple of the companies they are also in lack of the qualified personnel, IT specialists, all of those people who were, let's call them, emancipated and liberal. They left Russia. They do not see any sort of the perspective to stay and work and live in Russia, so they're searching themselves elsewhere. They left for Central Asian countries, for Caucasus countries. Those people who had money and businesses, they went to Dubai, to Southeast Asia and elsewhere. Still, there are some of the countries that accept Russian passports, and they give permanent residentship for investments and so on. Yeah, for Europe, for America, it's kind of complicated for Russians to get to, but for the rest of the countries, well, with some of the investments and for qualified personnel, it is possible. So if there is a mobilization in Russia, and I think personally that it's imminent with the current Russian losses, the Russian economy will struggle even deeper, and it will reflect the abilities in general for Russia to continue this war. So my prediction that in 2028, something like that, yeah, the second half of 2028, the intensity of the war will go down significantly, and Russia will finally be forced to stop this war, and that will create the backfire for Putin personally, for his regime, because people would question, what was this war for? Even Russian Z patriots would ask Putin by the time they will have maybe 2 million of the losses, like we gained maybe Donbass and that's it. If we cannot propel forward, we don't have resources, our economy is in a deep problem, and what should we do? What is next? Putin is a traitor of the Russian peace even. And there could be some of the new Prigozhins, some of the black swans appeared once again to change the Russian regime. And that will trigger the mechanism of the Russian self-destruction, as it was in 1917 with the Russian Empire, as it was later with the Soviet Union in 1991. This process is just absolutely imminent for Putin, and his mistake was not to agree on ceasefire in 2025. He's still goal-oriented to ruin Ukraine and at the same time ruin his army, his economy, and himself in this case. I saw the defense lines that Ukraine was capable to build recently in multiple of the directions, Donetsk Oblast, Zaporizhia. They're unpenetratable. I do not honestly understand how Russia may cross those. Well, the idea for Ukraine is not actually to stop halt Russian army completely, but to direct them into the areas where Ukraine is waiting for Russians to advance. They for purpose leave the gaps in defense where Ukraine concentrates the fire of rocket artillery, standard artillery, FPV drones, drone strikes, and lots of the other stuff. So it grinds the Russian army down, and even if Russia is successful in crossing some defense line, there is the next one after 5 kilometers, after 10 kilometers, and this process continues and continues. Ukraine was also capable to expand the drone kill zone in multiple of the front lines directions, especially in the hot zones. So even on so-called Russian-controlled territory, then they occupied those settlements and they created, as they thought, safe bridgeheads, supply centers, hubs. They've been hit by Ukraine. Standard FPV drone strikes, long-range FPV, Firepoint company, they produce very effective FP2 drones. They are being used by Ukraine vastly on occupied territories, even in Crimea, hitting Russian air defense, Russian storages, ammunition warehouses. Every freaking day I see those videos. And Russia cannot accumulate enough resources in their bridgeheads for the further attacks. Russian army is definitely struggling, especially after Kupiansk operation done by Ukraine pretty much successfully, where Russian forces were trapped, encircled. The same stuff happened, by the way, in Donetsk direction, where Russia broke through Zolotyi Kolodets towards Ukrainian main defense line. But after it, Ukraine just trapped Russian forces out there. It was really outstanding, and it shows that Russia doesn't have this capability to attack as they want, to advance further, to break through Ukrainian defense. Russia also struggles, and they will continue to struggle even more, because we see the signs in the Russian economy that they cannot fulfill what Putin wants from Russia, from all of this system. It's fallen apart already, and it's just a matter of time that the Russian economy will finally collapse with Russia itself. Those are the great news, yes. But the bad news that this war, as I say to you, it will continue for many of the years ahead, and it will come to some of the standstill, and after it, it's going to be over for the Russian regime. The only thing that might save Russia in one or other way is the internal instability of Ukraine. That's why now I'm against elections, because it creates huge instability. It's like a small revolution in any sort of the country. It creates national division and this internal blackmail and so on. It is very dangerous in a country that goes in a full-scale war against Russia. Or it's better to say Russia had started this full-scale war against Ukraine. Ukraine didn't do it. Absolutely. Ukraine just defends itself pretty much successfully, as we see. Yeah, Ukraine also has issues, Ukraine requires army reforms. We also have those Soviet mindset commanders in the Ukrainian army. But in general, Ukrainian leadership is way, way more competent than the Russian one. And we have this freedom of speech, freedom of press. And there is definitely the effort from Ukrainian people, Ukrainian soldiers to change the system for better. That's why there were revolutions before in Ukraine, some of them peaceful, some of them not, but Ukrainians have decided that they will be the part of the democratic world, Western world, and they will not let even corruption to stay in Ukraine. I mean, this aggressive corruption that was and maybe still is. I'm very positive about the changes that NABU uncovered, those corrupt schemes. Yes, in a way it harms reputation of Ukraine because many people involved, they were in Zelensky's circle, but finally I think Zelensky did the proper step by laying off Andriy Yermak, who was damn corrupt, and now there is investigation being started against him as well. Yeah, this morning there were the news that Budanov finally was proposed for that position and he agreed, so it's the good change for Andriy Yermak, as I say, and the Russians, they're butt-hurting because for them Budanov is a terrorist. He is responsible for lots of the operations against Russians. So I think maybe as the head of the president's office, Budanov may try to change the system. And just for you to understand, this position of the head of the president's office is similar to vice president position in the United States. Yeah, it's just maybe some sort of the bureaucrat cleric, but remember Dick Cheney? Yeah, he was a very aggressive vice president, so maybe Budanov is going to be like that as well. For sure he will obtain more resources and he will influence not just military intelligence but lots of the spheres of Ukraine. Ukrainian defense capabilities, I think, will increase with Budanov as the head of the president's office. So nothing good for Russia expect this year. Ukraine has started with huge kaboom attack on Russian oil capabilities, refineries, oil storages and so on. Plus Budanov was appointed on really important position. Also Denis Kapustin, the head of the Russian Volunteer Corps, is alive. He wasn't killed. Also good news for us. The Russians were happy about his death, but not any longer. They understand that if everything goes according to this plan of Ukraine for Russian degradation, and it is already happening, that the Russian Volunteer Corps will play a great role in Russia, within Russia, to destabilize it from inside. But Putin's attempts to destabilize Ukraine and the Ukrainian society, they basically fail. Because what Russia wants to do, they want to hit Ukrainian cities with their drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles. And they want to force like that for Ukrainians to be against Ukrainian government, to break this will for resistance. In its turn, it may cause the internal instability in Ukraine, as Putin thinks. But no, it's wrong. It has never been like that. Even in the Second World War, the bombing of civilian infrastructure doesn't help to change the mind of the people or to crush their will for resistance. Usually it's vice versa, because Putin bombs also regions where people speak or used to speak Russian. Those regions that Russian propaganda named Novorossiya, or as Putin said, Russian original territories. People there, they hate Russia even more after every sort of the strike. And just now, while I'm recording this video, there was this strike on Kharkiv. And I have lots of the friends in Kharkiv, and they say they hate Russia. They don't like it because Russia bombs them. And it increases the internal resistance of people. It increases also the volunteer effort of Ukrainians, because they understand that if they donate for example, Ukrainian drone interceptors to Sternenko or someone else, there will be less of those strikes on their cities, of course. And they also want some sort of the revenge strikes on Russian territory. That's why they also donate for long-range drones or for FPV drones, for us to see those videos of how Russians are running away, or it's better to say trying to run away from Ukrainian drones on the front lines. Magar posts lots of those videos, and seeing those, it's definitely understandable that Russia is not winning. Nowadays, then I read most of the Russian military bloggers who definitely say the information as more or less it is. They only complain. It's like, you know, Prigozhin was screaming, "Shoigu, Gerasimov, where is the munition?" That is how Russians are now screaming, that they lose this war.
because they have significant losses, and Ukraine even counterattacks. Kupiansk, it was a terrible thing for Russia, for Russians' morale, and still it is. And the situation there is getting worse and worse. As well as in other directions, Russians say that they're in lack of everything, that they suffer. They cannot do it for years and years. So I expect that finally Russia will be kaputted by Putin, his own regime, and we will not recognize Russia in around 10 years. Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting. I'm gonna record lots of the videos, not the update from Ukraine, but update from Russia. I'm sure about it. I will have the content till the rest of my life, it seems like. Maybe we're gonna visit some of the republics that will appear after Russian collapse, that will be friendly for Ukraine or something. Of course, it creates the global risks, and I think that our allies, they do not really want for Russia to collapse because there are nukes and so on. No one may predict what it could happen in case of the civil war in Russia, but it's inevitable. It was inevitable before the war in Ukraine, I mean this disintegration of Russia, but now the wind of time blows very fast with stupid Putin's decision, first of all, to start this war, and the second worst decision for him was not to agree on Trump's proposal. Absolutely what he does, I mean Putin, by telling lies about the strikes of Ukraine on his own residency, it's all tells that Putin wants to continue. His goal is not the peace negotiation, peace agreement or something. He just wants Ukraine, and more than Ukraine, as I told you. But by doing so, he will destroy not only himself, but his country. It will finally collapse as it started its collapse at the beginning of the 20th century, from the disintegration of the Russian Empire. And why am I sure about it? Because simply, physically, Russia cannot sustain itself without being empire, as it is right now. Some sort of the classical empire that always needs to conquer some of the land, some of the other countries. Without it, Russia will collapse, absolutely. They cannot live in this format of the modern-day world. In a global economy, it's not possible. So all of those proposals for some sort of the business deals with Russia, they're for nothing. Russia is not about business deals. Russia is about conquering and ruling as it was centuries ago. And it cannot survive by doing so. So we'll see the collapse with you in our lifetime, guys, in our lifetime. Okay, guys, that's all I want to say for today. I hope you like those kind of the format of the videos where I just speak, blah, blah, blah. I will record one more video update about the situation in Ukraine today in my studio. But for me, it's always interesting to chat with you just like that. I understand that I have less views for those videos, but I like it, so I do it on my channel. And if you want to support my job, as usual, you're very welcome to Patreon. The link is in the video description below, or join membership on the YouTube channel. If you watch me on Spotify, thank you so much for it as well. You may subscribe for me on Spotify, because it's like an alternate platform for me to chat with you, and there I upload not just the updates from Ukraine, but different other videos. Spotify, the link for it is also in description. Guys, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.